This is another reading from Robert Whiting's Japan, and I'm going to do it in one take today. This is called Notes on Being a Gaijin, February 23rd, 2022. Tokyo. Looking back when I first arrived in Tokyo, I was pretty condescending and American-centric, and I'd stayed that way longer than I should have. I was like a lot of other Americans in that era who felt superior to the Japanese for a variety of reasons, including the outcome of the war, the US GNP, the high level of Major League Baseball, Hollywood movies, rock music, and any number of things. I thought that in my naivete and stupidity during that time, that the USA would be automatically loved and respected by right-thinking people. It took me a while to realize that I was wrong and that Japan was superior to the US in many ways, that Tokyo was a superior city to New York, and that there were many Japanese who were the mirror image of me. In other words, who felt just as superior to me as I did towards them. This was especially so during the bubble era. Now, polls during that time showed that Japanese citizens did not find Americans particularly honest or hardworking, although surveys also showed 60% of Japanese had never met a foreigner. In time, I also started to notice the many ways Japanese discriminated against foreigners. Landlords wouldn't rent to foreigners. Some bars and nightclubs wouldn't let foreigners in. Baseball and sumo restricted Gaijin involvement. The fact that Shintaro Ishihara, famous for his anti-foreign views, kept getting reelected to Diet. And then to Tokyo governor was further evidence that anti-foreigner attitudes existed. It was a constant irritant in Tokyo life and still is today. There are proprietors of restaurants, nightclubs, and other such establishments who will look at you and automatically assume your presence in their establishments will upset other customers or somehow mean trouble, and they'll form an X with their arms. Japanese only. This doesn't happen as often as it used to, but it still happens. In 2017, survey of some 18,000 foreign residents by the Justice Ministry complained of discrimination. 39% said their application to rent an apartment was rejected because they were a foreigner. 29.8% complained of race-based insults. 31.7% complained of getting weird stares. Tokyo may be a great city, you will hear foreigners say, but you will always be a gaijin no matter what you do, no matter how well you learn the language and ape the local customs. New York is a giant melting pot of all sorts of ethnic groups, despite the media image of a stereotypical New Yorker. No matter how different someone looks in Manhattan, you assume they belong. It's the same in other major cities like London and Paris. In Japan, however, if you're from Europe or North America or the subcontinent or Africa, people will assume you don't belong. You are labeled a gaijin, outside person. And that's what you are, even if Japanese use the polite version of the term gaikokujin, person of outside country. This is true no matter how well you speak Japanese. In fact, if you speak Japanese too perfectly, it may confuse people so much they will assume you are speaking a foreign language. There are foreigners who have made a living complaining and writing about discrimination, like English teacher Debito Arudo, a naturalized Japanese, formerly known as David Alwinkle. He successfully sued a bathhouse in Hokkaido for refusing him admission and has since made it his mission to seek out and expose every shop or bar in Japan that excludes foreign clients, or to censure everyone who assumes that the big, hairy, broad-shouldered white guy is a foreigner, even though he carries a Japanese passport. Good for him. On the other hand, in my experience, Americans and some Europeans, to grossly generalize, are louder and noisier than Japanese. And to add that if I were running a restaurant where dignified quiet was prized, or was the landlord of an apartment building in Tokyo where eviction is traditionally difficult, as it is in Japan, I would be wary of embracing the Gaijin as well. As Thomas Blakemore, who spent over 40 years as a lawyer in Japan, in fact, the only foreign lawyer qualified to argue in a Japanese court, put it, well, yes, the Japanese were racist. The Japanese preferred to be around other Japanese and to socialize and do business with other Japanese. They all understood the ground rules. Gaijin would come into the picture, and they were often loud and demonstrative and crude to the Japanese way of thinking. They didn't want the hassle of dealing with foreigners, and I could understand that. There is also this side to the story. All the countless little ways Japanese go out of their way to make life easier for foreigners living in Japan. Like ask for directions and you'll be likely guided to your destination, or lose your wallet and it'll be delivered to your doorstep. The thing about Japanese is they don't especially like you, they tolerate you for the most part. They leave you alone. They won't beat you up. And there are enough people in the city who do like foreigners, and that makes the experience of living here all worthwhile. Indeed, there were many ordinary, kind hearted people who go the extra mile to accommodate foreigners who can't speak Japanese well and give them extra treatment. That doesn't happen in the States. If there are a lot of Japanese who are aloof to foreigners, it might also be pointed out that they are aloof to each other as well. Attitudes towards foreigners have changed somewhat over the past 30 years or so. This is indicated in surveys conducted by the Tokei Suri Kenkyujo, a Japanese government research organization. One of the questions they regularly ask is, suppose your child said, I want to marry a foreigner. Would you approve or disapprove? In 1988, 36 of the respondents said they would disapprove, while only 28% said they would approve. In 2008, 51% of the respondents said they would approve, while only 20% said they were against the idea. That's a pretty big change. And indeed, the number of so called international marriages has really jumped. 10% of all marriages in Shinjuku ward these days are of the international variety, mostly involving Koreans and Japanese. In recent years, the Japanese government has loosened some restrictions on foreign residents so that resident visas are easier to get than they used to be and last longer. For example, anyone can get a student visa for Japan, and is allowed to work for up to 28 hours a week, with eligibility for health coverage included. A student visa can also be easily transferred to a work visa. Moreover, Japan now accepts immigrants to work in areas where the bureaucracy feels they have a need to fill. The JET, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, is an example of this. The gates that are being opened are in other ways as well. As of March 2017, foreign professionals with special skills became eligible to apply for and get permanent residence in as little as 1 year as part of a government plan to stimulate the Japanese economy with high level human resources. Skilled workers can always come in under work visas as well. Engineers, doctors, scientists, and artists are examples. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs even welcomes skilled Russian or Chinese immigrants, a category that is often barred from other nations, with special categories set aside for them. This flies in the face of those accuse Japan of being closed. As of late 2020, Japan housed 1.72 million foreign workers out of a total population of 125.8 million, and just 2.5% of its working population. According to Japan economist Jesper Kohl, roughly 5.4% of all private sector workers in Tokyo in 2016 were non Japanese. That's up from 3.1% 6 years earlier. Summing up. Summing up, the key to living in Tokyo is to embrace being a foreigner, accept the benefits that come with it, and ignore the slights because they are minor and infrequent. Construct your own world with your own network of social and professional associates, and you'll be fine. You don't need to turn Japanese and become a community organizer. It's all right to be an outsider. That's what I learned from being in Tokyo for 50 years. I had the privilege of knowing Donald Ritchie, the famous writer of Japanese film and author of the classic Inland Sea. He had arrived during the occupation and lived most of his life in Tokyo. He was a center of his own intellectual circle, which included Edward Seidenstecker, Carl van Wolferen, and Akira Kurosawa. He had a wide array of other acquaintances, including the Hollywood actress Ava Gardner, whom he had escorted around Tokyo when she visited Japan in the 1950s on a PR tour. Donald had even persuaded her to donate her panties to the proprietor of a bar in Asakusa. The owner proudly pinned them up on a wall behind the counter, and there they stayed for 50 years. Donald had divorced his American wife and sent her home so that he could enjoy life as a bachelor, drinking in Tokyo bars every night and enjoying one night stands with Japanese men. At age 80, he bragged about giving a blowjob to a complete stranger in Ueno Park. Donald liked to say he was a nation of one. He told me that he never sought to become a Japanese citizen, but instead reveled in his position on the margins of Japanese society, which offered him much more freedom than he could have had being back in Ohio. He said, "You're free to do what you want here," he said. "You can think more, you can feel more deeply. As a foreigner, you have the best seat in the house. They leave us alone, and we're not really held responsible for things. We're like big children. This is a big advantage. I've lived a freer life than I could have ever lived in America, the land of the free. I never said I fell in love with Japan. A lot of people writing about me have said that I fell in love with Japan. Maybe I've never trusted anything or anybody to the extent of falling in love, but I do feel great feelings of liberation." Conversely, he added, "if I were Japanese, I wouldn't stay in this country for 10 minutes. I stay here because I'm in a position which I find preferable, a position where none of their qualifications for being a member apply." I knew what he meant. Japanese spend much of their free time fulfilling social obligations, attending funerals, weddings, family events at temples, and Shinto shrine gravesites, or playing golf compulsory with coworkers and bosses. Working in a Japanese company was a 7-day a week proposition. Life was even worse for high school students with juku and examination hell. Gaijin were free to appreciate Tokyo more than the Japanese because we had fewer obligations to meet. They gave you a pass. You didn't have to go to all the funerals and weddings and other events that Japanese are required to attend. And you could also screw up social rituals like the Meishi name card exchange, and no one will care. Also, I might add that I was able to maintain my affection for Tokyo because I've been able to get out for several weeks at a time, usually in the winter and summer. For years, my wife and I spent summers in Europe, usually Paris, but on occasion Stockholm, Geneva, or Vienna, and our winters in Honolulu. In later years, as round the world air travel became a burden, we settled on a house on the central coast of California. Now, being away from Tokyo makes you appreciate the good things about it when you get back, just as being away from the US and Europe made you appreciate the good things about those places. It's important to get out, to refresh, and press the reset button. It also helped I was not dependent on a Japanese employer for my livelihood. I was not an English teacher. I was not an employee of a Japanese company needing corporate sponsorship to stay in Japan. I didn't have to pound the pavement looking for work. I published books in North America, and Japanese book publishers would translate them, sometimes serializing them in magazines first. I also did related speaking and media engagements. There was no one to boss me around, to pigeonhole me. I was answerable to no one except readers. I learned that there is no magic formula. It boils down to managing your expectations. Don't stew over things that are out of your control. Just accept it. Tips on living in Tokyo. 1. Stay away from rush hour trains or subways. 2. Don't force your views on Japanese. They don't like to argue as much as people in the West do. They avoid confrontation. 3. Try to spend the summer outside of Tokyo and try to get out at least twice a year. It will just make the city that much more enjoyable. 4. Don't complain that Japanese politeness is superficial and they quote really don't mean it. It's better than the alternative. 5. Learn to speak Japanese. 6. Don't try to bargain with shopkeepers. Save that for Osaka. 7. Don't smoke pot. You'll wind up in jail or deported. And finally, 8. Never try to undress a girl in a kimono. That's the end. If you want to find more of these, you can go to Tokyo Junkie. The junkie is spelled JUNKIE.com. Or you can go to Robert Whiting, one word, .substack.com. Again, this was Notes on Being a Gaijin, and it was published February 23rd, 2022.